What up, nerds? It's your boy Payton coming at you with another episode of Script Tips. In this episode, I want to talk all about web cookies, how to use them, when to use them, why you might need them. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So there are three types of web cookies. We have session cookies first, and session cookies are short-term cookies that last only for the user's session. So a user goes to your website, and when they close their browser and come back, that cookie is gone. An example of this might be an anonymous shopping cart in some shopping app where a user comes in, they add a bunch of junk to their shopping cart, realize they don't want to buy it because all the stuff sucks, they close out of your website, they come back and they look at their shopping cart and it's empty because the session cookie deleted everything since it was only a short-term cookie. And then we have persistent cookies, and persistent cookies are like session cookies where they store some information but they last for a longer time. And you get to choose how long that lasts. However, although you get to choose, it's possible for the browser to delete that cookie. And we'll get into that more a little later. So a persistent cookie example would be when a user comes to your website, maybe you have a settings page, the user goes there, they set some settings, whatever settings, I don't know, use your imagination, and then they leave and they come back 3 days later, 4 days later, a month later, and when they go back to your website, those settings will still exist because they were on a persistent cookie, which lasts multiple visits, multiple amount of days. And then we have third-party cookies, and third-party cookies come from a third party, believe it or not. And the third party might be some sort of advertisement that you have in your application you're showing to your users, and that advertisement might contain a cookie that is looking at the user, gathering data about it to send to their little marketing company to do, God knows what. So be careful about those. People don't really like those, but just be aware that they exist. You won't be using them since they're a third-party cookie. And so in this episode, we're going to cover session cookies and persistent cookies and how to use those. Before we get into this, we need to cover some of the limitations that browsers set on cookies. Browsers set the amount of cookies that you can store per domain, the amount of cookies total that a browser can store, and also the size of the cookies. And all of these limitations can be different amongst each browser. There's a soft limit that is more of like a guideline than anything, but each browser has their own implementation of it, which can be different. So first off, there's a soft limit of 20 cookies per domain. This is what you should stick to as your maximum number, because if you start adding more than 20 cookies, some of the browsers might not add those extra cookies because it's reached the limit for the domain. And what I mean by domain is essentially your website. So google.com would be a domain. Google.com could have 20 cookies before browsers start deleting some of them. Browsers also have a soft limit of about 300 cookies amongst all domains. Any domain that the browser uses, any cookie that the browser stores, 300 is the soft limit of this. So if you get above 300 total in your browser, the browser might start deleting some of them. Keep that in mind. Also, cookies have a size limit, and this is definitely variable amongst all browsers. So there's a size limit of about 4 kilobytes. It could be more, it could be less depending on your browser, but try and keep your cookies less than 4 kilobytes. This includes any sort of metadata along with the key value pair that you use in your cookie. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started creating some cookies of our own. The first thing I'm going to do is create a file called index.js, and this is just going to be where we store our code to create the actual cookies. And now I'm going to create another file called index.html, and this will just be some markup so we can display stuff on our website. And I'm going to first import the script. Source is index.js. And then I'm going to add a little bit of body here and set a style. We're going to do text align is center just to make it a little bit easier to read. And for now, I'm just going to add some dummy text. Yay, it's working. Cool. So what I'm using right here is a package called liveserver. It can be installed via npm install-g liveserver like this. That's how I use it. And what liveserver is just a way to refresh and run your websites locally. It's really nice. Automatic refresh as soon as you make changes. It will reflect inside your browser. And we can run it in our app by just calling liveserver on the command line like this once it's installed. And we can see that our app loads and yay, it's working. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started creating our first cookie. So I'm going to go back to the code, and inside the index.js file, I'm going to call this object document.cookie. And this is where you can create and read your cookies. So a cookie takes 3 parameters. The first one is a name value pair, and this is where you store the name of the cookie and also the data that the cookie holds. So let's just say first name, and I'll set it equal to Payton because that's my first name, if I can even spell my name. And the second item is an expires. It expires a date. And this is what separates a persistent cookie from a session cookie. If you put an expires date sometime in the future, it'll tell the browser to hold onto the cookie until that date arrives. So once that date arrives, then the browser will realize that and delete the cookie. But until then, it'll hold that cookie inside of its cookie storage. We're just going to make a session cookie right now, so we don't need this. The third item that a cookie takes is a path. And this path tells the browser where this cookie is accessible within your website. So if you put path to slash, which is the default, so if you put no path item here, if this is gone, it'll default to path equals slash. But if you put this, it means that it's accessible throughout your application. If you add something else onto the end of this, like maybe nested, it'll mean that this cookie is only accessible inside of the nested folder in your application. So if we had a folder called nested like this, and we had a nested.html in here, basically what this would mean is that this cookie is only accessible inside this nested.html. If we just had path equal to slash, the cookie would be accessible inside our index.html as well as our nested.html. So let's just go ahead and save this, and we're going to open up our browser again. I'm going to inspect this and go to the application tab, and under the cookies in the storage, we can see that our cookie exists here with name is first name, value is Payton, it has our domain, which is localhost, our path, which is slash by default, and then we also can tell that it is a session cookie because it doesn't have an expires date here, and it also says session. All right, let's go ahead and create a persistent cookie now so we can compare the two. So we're going to go back to the JavaScript here, and we can create another cookie by doing the exact same thing that we did creating the first cookie, where we call document.cookie. That's not it. Document.cookie, like this. And despite what you might think, it doesn't override the previous cookie unless we specify the same name for the cookie. So if we did something like first name again equals Bob, and we saved this and went back to our application, we can see that now the value is Bob, so it overrode it. So we don't want to do that. So what we're going to do here is create another one called, I don't know, let's just say persistent, like that. We'll set it to Apple. And then we need to set an expires date, which is what makes it different between a session cookie. So we'll set expires, and we'll just pick some random date. I don't know. It could be, it's just a date string, so like Thursday, the 20th of April, maybe like, I don't know, somewhere out in the future, 2069, I guess. It's pretty far out, and we'll set to just some random time. You know, I don't know, like this. So if we save this and we go back to our browser, we can see that we now have the persistent cookie on here as well as our first cookie, and this one now has an expires date. So what this means is if we comment this out, comment both of these out, because we don't want to reset them, and we refresh the page, they're still there, so I'll just refresh again. And I'm going to copy this just to make it easier. So if we close out of the browser and open Chrome back up and return to our local host and open the inspect application again, we can see that persistent is the only cookie that's there. The first name cookie is gone because that was a session cookie. The persistent one's still there because it has this expires date that's way out in the future, so the browser is holding on to it until that date arrives. Once that date arrives, the browser will delete it. A problem with persistent cookies is that they can be kind of weird to delete. So if we comment this out like it is, and then we go back to our application, we can see that no matter what, it's not gonna delete. I mean, we could clear it here. The user could come in here and clear their cookies, and it would be gone. But that doesn't really help because people don't really do that. So if you want to delete it, I'm just going to go ahead and remake it really quick just so we can see. What you need to do is actually set a date that's in the past. And what that would do is just tell the browser that the cookie is no longer needed. It's expired. And that's similar to how it works to override the value of the cookie, which you can do that here. So if you just want to change the value, something random like poop, we can come back here and we can change the value, but it doesn't delete it unless we specify a date that's in the past. So if we say April 20th of 2000 and refresh that, then we can see that the browser deleted the cookie because it's now expired. So if you need to delete a cookie, a persistent cookie, what you need to do is set the expires date to a date that is in the past. I want to go back and revisit the path because we didn't really cover that much. So I'm going to I'm going to comment out our persistent cookie and uncomment our session cookie. And in here, I'm just going to set the path to /nested. I'm going to save that, and then I'm going to go to our nested.html. I'm just going to add some markup just so we can see what's going on, that we're actually on the page. We'll just make an h1 and say nested. I'm going to save that and go back to my browser. So I'm going to refresh this, and here we can see that we don't have any cookies at our base level. But if I go to /nested.html, we can see that we have a cookie here. And if we go back, there's no cookie. So we can go back to /nested, there's a cookie, back to our main page, and there's no cookie. And so that's how the path works. Basically, it's just saying that only the nested directory, anything inside of it, can use our cookie here. All right, let's talk about how size matters and how smaller is actually better. So what I'm going to do is create another document.cookie, and we'll call this one Big Boy because it's got a lot of text. And I copied some lorem ipsum placeholder text from the internet. I'm just going to paste it here. And if we look at it, we can see that this is roughly around 4,100 characters. And I'm going to save this and go back to our website here, and we can see that the cookie is not getting stored. It's too big for Chrome to handle. So I'm going to go back here, and let's just take out a couple sentences here. I don't know, and just try and get it so Chrome can store it. I'm going to save it, and we can see that it's cum soit natuk here. So if we go in here, we can see that we have Big Boy is now stored, and the value cum soit natuk, and whatever else comes after that is there. So if I actually undo this and save it and go back to Chrome, we can see that the value hasn't changed yet because the cookie is too big for Chrome to handle. But it's possible that other browsers can handle the size of the cookie. So if we go to Firefox, for instance, and we go to, I don't want to use default browser, we go to localhost 8080, we can see our website is running here. If we inspect and go to storage, we can see that our cookie, Big Boy, is there, and it has the full lorem ipsum $, and everything else. And it also shows our other cookie on the nested path for some reason. Firefox just must show all the cookies where Chrome doesn't. So there we can see that it's possible for your cookie to be too big on some browsers, but not on others. So it's a good idea to keep your cookies smaller so that the browsers can store them. All of the browsers can store them, and not just some of them. That about does it for this episode. Next episode, we're going to make a small application where we actually use the cookies to remember some information about the user. But in this one, it was getting a little bit long, so I decided to end it. So thank you for watching. If you like the content, feel free to like it, and also subscribe if you want to get updates and see the next video. Until then, have a good one, and I'll see you next time.